Sarah Mitchell arrived at Harrison Properties at 4:45 a.m., 15 minutes before her cleaning crew would begin filtering in. The early March wind whipped through downtown Chicago, carrying the faint scent of Lake Michigan and yesterday's rain. She pulled her worn navy blazer tighter, fingers brushing over the name tag she still wore with pride. Operations Supervisor, Custodial Services. The lobby's marble floors reflected the dim security lights as she made her way to the service elevator. Most people saw these floors only when they gleamed during business hours, never considering the hands that made them shine. Sarah knew every inch of this building, from the executive suites on the 40th floor to the maintenance tunnels below ground. At the employee entrance, she greeted Manuel, who was already organizing the supply carts. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," he said, handing her the day's inventory list. "The new cleaning solution came in yesterday." "Thanks, Manuel." "And please, it's still Sarah." She checked the list while walking to her small office, really more of a converted storage room with a desk. Her MBA textbooks were stacked neatly in one corner, post-it notes marking important passages for next week's exam. By 5:15 a.m., her team of 23 was assembled in the break room. Sarah stood before them, clipboard in hand, reviewing the day's assignments. These people weren't just employees to her. They were a family who had supported her through 5 years of night classes and 2 promotions. "Remember, the board meeting is at 9 today," she reminded them. 41st floor needs to be immaculate. Mr. Harrison specifically requested extra attention to the conference room windows. As if summoned by his name, James Harrison's elevator arrived at precisely 6:30 a.m. Sarah was checking the lobby's fresh flowers when the CEO strode in, his Italian leather shoes clicking against her freshly polished floors. At 45, Harrison cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. "Mitchell," he called out, not breaking stride. "There's a streak on the east window of my office. Have someone take care of it before the board arrives." "Yes, Mr. Harrison. I'll handle it personally." He paused, turning slowly. "You know, Mitchell, I've been watching your work lately." His tone carried something she couldn't quite read. Very thorough, very detail-oriented. Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze. "Thank you, sir. In fact, I'd like you to stop by my office later. My assistant will send down the details." With that, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and an uneasy feeling in Sarah's stomach. By noon, the streak was long gone. The board meeting had ended, and Sarah's phone buzzed with an email from Harrison's assistant. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, expecting a complaint or criticism. Instead, she found an invitation to the annual Harrison Properties Gala, one of the city's most exclusive social events. She read it 3 times, each pass revealing new details. The Drake Hotel, black tie, +1, next Saturday evening. The kind of event where Chicago's elite networked over $1,000 bottles of wine, where deals were made and careers were minted or broken. In the bathroom mirror, Sarah studied her reflection. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, minimal makeup, sensible shoes. Her uniform, while neat, marked her as clearly as any brand. She thought of Harrison's smirk, the way he'd said thorough, and understood with crushing clarity. This wasn't an honor. It was a setup. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her brother Michael's daily check-in text. "Lunch today? I'm between surgeries at Northwestern." Sarah looked at the invitation again, then back at her reflection. Something shifted in her eyes, a quiet determination replacing the initial uncertainty. She texted back, "Yes, we need to talk. It's important." The morning shift was ending, but Sarah Mitchell's real challenge was just beginning. James Harrison settled into his leather chair, gazing out over Chicago's skyline from his corner office on the 41st floor. The morning sun glinted off neighboring skyscrapers, creating a golden cage around his domain. He swirled the espresso in his custom ceramic cup, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You should have seen her face, Richard," he said to his CFO, who lounged in one of the visitor chairs. "Like a deer in headlights, absolutely priceless." Richard Chen adjusted his designer glasses, concern flickering across his features. "James, I'm not sure about this. Mitchell runs a tight ship. The building's operational costs are down 15% since she took over, and tenant satisfaction is at an all-time high." "That's exactly my point." Harrison set down his cup with a sharp click. "She's getting too comfortable, too confident. Did you know she's pursuing an MBA? At Northwestern, no less. On a custodial supervisor's salary." He snorted. "Someone needs to remind her of her place." The morning's board meeting materials still lay scattered across his mahogany desk, including the quarterly performance reports that, ironically, showcased Sarah's department's excellence. Harrison pushed them aside with undisguised irritation. "Remember Gloria from accounting last year?" Harrison continued. "Started getting ideas above her station, talking about corporate leadership programs. The gala took care of that. She transferred to our Milwaukee office within a month." Richard shifted uncomfortably. Gloria was different. She was actually underperforming. Mitchell's numbers are solid. Numbers aren't everything, Richard. This is about maintaining order, structure. Harrison stood, walking to the window. Below, the city moved in its carefully stratified layers. Executives in town cars, middle management hurrying through crosswalks, service workers barely visible in their purposeful scurrying. Everyone has their place. The moment they forget that, the whole system starts to crack. He thought back to his father's words from decades ago. "Jimmy, you can't build a tower from the top down. You need a strong foundation, but you also can't let the foundation forget it's the foundation." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harrison, the invitation has been delivered to Ms. Mitchell's inbox." "Excellent, Claire. Send in the event planner." Moments later, Sophia Kensington swept in, her tablet already displaying the gala's seating chart. "Mr. Harrison, about the arrangements, put her at table 11, Harrison interrupted. "Next to the Vandermeer widow, the one who spent last year's gala talking about her prize poodles." "And her +1? Sophia asked, stylus poised. Harrison laughed. "Please, you think someone like that has connections? She'll either come alone or not at all. Either way, mission accomplished." He turned back to Richard. "Sometimes people need a reminder of reality. This isn't about cruelty. It's about maintaining necessary boundaries." Richard stood, gathering his papers. "If you say so, James. Just remember, sometimes reality has a way of surprising us." "Speaking from experience?" Harrison's voice carried a slight edge. Richard paused at the door. "Let's just say I've learned not to underestimate people who have nothing to lose and everything to prove." He left, leaving Harrison alone with his thoughts and his view. The CEO returned to his desk, pulling up Sarah's employee file on his computer. 5 years of impeccable service records, glowing testimonials from tenants, innovative cost-saving initiatives. In another life, he might have admired such dedication, but Harrison Properties hadn't become a real estate empire by promoting from the janitor's closet. "Claire," he called through the intercom, "get me the contact information for the Tribune Society photographer. I want every moment of this documented." As he resumed his daily tasks, Harrison allowed himself to imagine the scene. Sarah Mitchell, uncomfortable in borrowed finery, trying to navigate the shark-infested waters of Chicago's elite. It would be a lesson she'd never forget. And if she did forget, well, the photographs would serve as a permanent reminder. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky, casting long shadows across Harrison's empire. In his mind, everything was proceeding according to plan, but even emperors can't predict every variable in their carefully constructed equations. The Cornerstone Diner sat wedged between a boutique pharmacy and an artisanal bakery, its worn exterior a stark contrast to the gentrifying neighborhood around it. Sarah sat in her usual booth, the vinyl seat creaking familiarly as she shifted to check her phone again. The invitation email still sat open, its formal language seeming to mock her. The bell above the door chimed and Michael Mitchell strode in, still wearing his surgical scrubs under a Northwestern Memorial Hospital jacket. At 38, 4 years her senior, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from saving lives on a daily basis. "Sorry I'm late, sis," he said, sliding into the booth. Complicated appendectomy turned into a whole thing. He looked up to order from Doris, their regular waitress. "The usual, please, and whatever Sarah's having." "Already got her coffee, Dr. Mitchell," Doris said with a wink. "Black like her mood today, apparently." Michael studied his sister's face as Doris walked away. "All right, spill it. Your text had that emergency feeling, but you're not exactly in crisis mode." "What's up?" Sarah handed him her phone. He read the invitation, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something harder. "Harrison Properties Annual Gala," he read aloud. "By personal invitation of James Harrison." Well, it's not what you think," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "He's not being generous. He's being cruel." "Explain." She told him about the morning's encounter, Harrison's tone, the looks from his assistant. As she spoke, their food arrived, a Reuben for Michael, a club sandwich for her, both with extra pickles, a Mitchell family tradition. Remember when Mom used to take us here after church? Michael asked, seemingly changing the subject. She'd save all month for those Sunday lunches. Sarah nodded. Their mother had cleaned offices too, right up until cancer took her 5 years ago. She'd been so proud when Michael got into medical school, and equally proud when Sarah started taking night classes. You know what Mom would say about this Harrison character? Michael took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. She'd say he's so high up, he's forgotten what the ground looks like. That sounds like her. Sarah smiled, then sighed. But she's not here, and I have to decide what to do about this invitation. Michael wiped his hands and pulled out his phone. What time's your last class next Friday? 6. Why? Perfect. I'm blocking off next Saturday night. Cancel whatever plans you don't have, because you're not going to this thing alone. Sarah started to protest, but Michael held up a hand. Listen, if he wants to play games, let's play. But we'll play them our way. He grinned. Did you know half my department's board members are Harrison Properties investors? And that new cardiac wing I've been pioneering? Guess who's trying to fund it? Michael, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Besides, he took another bite. I still owe you for all those late-night study sessions you helped me with in med school. Remember those flashcards you made? Sarah felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. So you really think we can pull this off? Pull what off? We're just two successful professionals attending a business function. His eyes twinkled. The fact that one of us happens to be the humble employee and the other is on a first-name basis with half the hospital board, that's just an interesting coincidence. They spent the next hour planning, their coffee growing cold as they worked out details. When they finally left, Sarah felt lighter than she had all day. Outside, Michael hugged her goodbye, then held her at arm's length. One more thing, he said. You're not touching your savings for this. Consider it an early birthday present. Michael, non-negotiable. Mum would haunt me if I let you spend your MBA money on a dress you'll wear once. He started walking backward toward his car. I'll text you tomorrow. We've got work to do. Sarah watched him drive away, then checked the time. Her shift wasn't over, and the afternoon crew would be arriving soon. She straightened her uniform and started walking back to Harrison Properties, her steps purposeful, her mind already moving to the next phase of their plan. Sarah's apartment was quiet, save for the gentle hum of her laptop and the occasional turning of textbook pages. Advanced financial management concepts blurred before her eyes as midnight approached, her mind drifting between derivatives formulas and the weight of Saturday's impending gala. Her studio apartment, though small, was meticulously organized, a trait that had served her well in both work and studies. Her uniform hung pressed for tomorrow on a hook by the door. Beside it, a corkboard displayed her class schedule, work rotas, and a photograph of her mother at her high school graduation. The same proud smile she'd worn when Sarah announced her plans for an MBA. A notification popped up on her laptop, a new email from Harrison Properties. Her heart jumped, but it was just the weekly maintenance report. Still, seeing the company logo triggered a fresh wave of anxiety. She closed her textbook and walked to the window, looking out over the city's nightscape. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lisa, one of her evening shift supervisors. Heard about the invitation. Building's buzzing, you okay? Sarah started typing a response, then deleted it. How could she explain something she wasn't sure she understood herself? The gala was clearly meant to be a humiliation, but with Michael's support it could become... what exactly? A triumph? A statement? Or just another way to make things more complicated? Her laptop chimed again, this time a reminder about tomorrow's study group. They were meeting before her shift to review for next week's exam. One of her classmates, James Chen, was a junior analyst at Goldman Sachs. Last week he'd mentioned his firm was looking for operations managers with practical experience. Real-world knowledge, he'd called it, not just theory. Sarah returned to her desk, pulling up the gala invitation again. The Drake Hotel's elegant logo sparkled at the top of the email. She'd cleaned places like that early in her career, loaded laundry carts, scrubbed bathrooms, changed sheets. Now she'd be walking in through the front door as a guest. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Baby, there's no shame in honest work. The shame is in letting other people decide your worth. A soft knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Rosario from next door, still in her nurse's scrubs. I made too much soup, the older woman said when Sarah opened the door, holding out a container. Thought you might be studying late again. Thank you. Sarah accepted the container, touched by the gesture. How's the night shift treating you? Same as always. But guess what? My daughter finally got into nursing school. Mrs. Rosario beamed. She says watching me inspired her. You never know who's watching, learning from your example. After Mrs. Rosario left, Sarah sat at her small dining table, eating the soup and thinking about examples. About Michael, working his way through medical school. About her mother, who never missed a day of work even during chemo. About her team, many of whom were pursuing their own dreams of education and advancement. She opened her planner and began to write, not financial formulas this time, but a different kind of calculation. On one side, she listed the risks of attending the gala, potential humiliation, office politics, complicated dynamics with Harrison. On the other side, she wrote what she stood to gain: visibility, networking opportunities, the chance to reshape perceptions. Her phone buzzed again. Michael sending a photo of a business card. Met one of Harrison's board members at the hospital today. Mentioned I was attending the gala. Funny how small Chicago can be sometimes. Sarah smiled, adding another item to her gains column. The chance to show that dignity doesn't depend on social status. She finally replied to Lisa's text, "I'm more than okay, see you tomorrow." Returning to her desk, she pulled her textbook close again. The financial formulas suddenly seemed clearer, more relevant. After all, wasn't this what business was really about? Analyzing situations, calculating risks, seizing opportunities. Outside, Chicago's lights twinkled like stars, each one a reminder of the countless decisions being made in offices and apartments across the city. Sarah Mitchell had made hers. The Michigan Avenue boutique's lighting felt harsh after a morning of shadowy stockrooms and quiet corridors. Sarah stood straight as the saleswoman circled her, measuring tape in hand, trying not to flinch at the casual mention of price tags that equaled her monthly rent. "The red would be stunning with your coloring," the saleswoman, Margot according to her elegant nameplate, suggested, gesturing to a rack of evening gowns. "Though, perhaps something more conservative might suit your needs better." Before Sarah could respond, a familiar voice cut through the awkward moment. "The red, definitely the red." Michael strode in, still in his surgical scrubs, but somehow looking perfectly at home among the luxury dresses. "Sorry I'm late, sis. Had to finish rounds." Margot's demeanor shifted instantly. "Dr. Mitchell, lovely to see you again. How's your wife enjoying the cocktail dress she bought for the hospital fundraiser?" "She looked beautiful, thanks to your expertise." Michael smiled, then turned to Sarah. "Show me what you've found so far." The next hour transformed into something unexpected. Not an exercise in humility, but a celebration. Michael insisted she try on every dress that caught her eye, his medical precision finding fault with necklines that didn't quite sit right and hems that wouldn't work for dancing. "Remember when we used to play dress-up with Mom's clothes?" Sarah asked from behind the dressing room curtain, struggling with a zipper. "You always wore her nursing scrubs from her hospital days," Michael laughed. "Said you were going to be a doctor like me. Life had other plans. Life has a way of working out exactly as it should," Michael replied, his voice soft. "Mom would be proud of both of us, you know." The red dress was the last one she tried. The moment she stepped out, both Michael and Margot fell silent. The silk charmeuse draped perfectly, the color deep and rich against her skin. It was elegant without being showy, confident without trying too hard. "That's the one," Michael said simply. While Margot wrapped the dress, Michael handled the payment discreetly. Sarah pretended not to notice the number on the receipt he quickly tucked away. They left the boutique and walked to a nearby coffee shop, the dress box held carefully between them. "Next up, shoes and jewelry," Michael announced over his latte. "I know a place." "Michael, this is too much. Consider it 5 years of missed birthday presents." He pulled out his phone, showing her a series of text messages. "By the way, remember Dr. Patel from cardiology? Turns out he's on Harrison's board. Mentioned to him I was attending the gala with my sister. He was very interested." Sarah sipped her coffee, thinking about the morning's shift she'd covered before coming here, about Harrison's smirk when he'd passed her in the lobby, about her team's quiet support when she'd told them she would be attending. "I've been practicing," she said suddenly. "Practicing what?" "Everything. Table settings, wine glass placement, the proper way to excuse yourself from conversation." She pulled out her phone, showing him the etiquette videos she'd been studying. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right." Michael reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You know you don't have to prove anything to these people, right?" "I'm not proving anything to them," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I'm proving something to myself." They spent the rest of the afternoon in careful preparation. Michael taught her the names of hospital board members likely to attend, while she shared insights about Harrison Properties' recent projects. They were building armor, piece by piece, but it wasn't made of silk and jewelry. It was made of knowledge, confidence, and the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who you were. As evening approached, they parted ways outside the coffee shop. The dress box felt lighter now, more like a promise than a burden. 1 week, Michael called as he headed toward his car. 1 week and we show them what the Mitchells are made of. Sarah watched him go, then checked her watch. Just enough time to review her advanced financial management notes before bed. She had 2 battles to win, after all. One in a ballroom and one in a classroom. Both required the same weapons: preparation, dedication, and the courage to step into spaces others thought you didn't belong. The next morning, Harrison Properties hummed with barely contained curiosity. Sarah noticed it the moment she stepped into the service elevator. The subtle glances, the hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, the mix of concern and excitement in her team's eyes. "Miss Mitchell," Manuel caught her attention as she checked the supply closet inventory. "Is it true? About the gala?" Sarah looked up from her clipboard, seeing not just Manuel, but 3 other members of her morning crew hovering nearby. Their faces held a mixture of worry and admiration that made her throat tight. "Yes, it's true." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I'll be attending next Saturday." Rosa, who'd been with the company even longer than Sarah, stepped forward. "We heard—" She hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "We heard Mr. Harrison sometimes invites people to make fun of them, like he did with Ms. Gloria from accounting." The memory of Gloria's tear-stained face, her last day at work, flashed through Sarah's mind. She squared her shoulders. That's not going to happen this time. Throughout the day, news traveled through the building's invisible network, the one that connected maintenance staff, security guards, receptionists, and custodians. Sarah overheard fragments of conversations as she made her rounds. Harrison's assistant said he was laughing about it in his office. "But did you hear? Her brother's that surgeon from Northwestern. I heard the board's not happy with Harrison's games this year." By lunch, even the mid-level managers were talking. Sarah felt their eyes on her as she walked through the lobby, clipboard in hand, checking off her daily tasks with her usual efficiency. Some offered awkward smiles. Others quickly looked away. A few, like Linda from Human Resources, actually stopped to speak with her. "Sarah," Linda caught her by the coffee station. "I just wanted to say, well, if you need any advice about the gala, I've been to a few." "Thank you, Linda, I appreciate that." Harrison himself was conspicuously absent, tied up in meetings according to the daily schedule. His assistant Claire passed Sarah in the hallway and did a double-take, as if seeing her for the first time. "Ms. Mitchell," Claire called out, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "About your RSVP." "I'll be attending," Sarah replied calmly. "With my +1, Claire blinked. Oh, I'll update the seating chart." The afternoon brought more surprises. Sarah was checking the executive floor when she overheard a conversation through Harrison's partially open office door. "You're playing with fire, James." The voice belonged to Richard Chen, the CFO. "The board's been asking questions about employee retention and morale. This little game of yours—" "It's hardly a game, Richard. It's about maintaining standards. Perhaps if you'd been here longer." Sarah moved quietly past the door, but not before catching Richard's response. "I've been here long enough to know the difference between leadership and bullying." By end of shift, Sarah's phone was filled with messages from her evening MBA study group. Word had somehow reached the Northwestern campus. "Is it true?" texted James Chen, the Goldman Sachs analyst. "You're going to Harrison's gala? My firm's sending representatives?" She responded to them all with the same quiet confidence she'd maintained all day. Yes, she was attending. Yes, she was prepared. No, she wasn't worried. As she gathered her things to leave, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a collection of handwritten notes from her cleaning crew. "Show them what you're made of, Heffa. We believe in you, Ms. Mitchell. You've already proved yourself to the people who matter." Sarah carefully tucked the envelope into her bag, next to her MBA textbooks. Outside, the city was settling into evening, lights flickering on in office windows across the skyline. Somewhere up there, Harrison was probably still plotting, still certain of how his little drama would play out. But down here, in the halls and hearts of the people who kept his building running, a different story was taking shape, one about dignity, respect, and the quiet power of being underestimated. Sarah checked her watch. Just enough time to change before her evening class. Another day of preparation, another step closer to Saturday night. Friday evening cast long shadows through Sarah's apartment as she methodically prepared for tomorrow's gala. The red dress hung on her closet door, no longer an intimidating presence, but a statement of intent. Beside it, her usual work uniform hung clean and pressed for Monday morning, a reminder that no matter what happened tomorrow, she had built something real here. Her phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Michael. "Ready for tomorrow, sis?" His face appeared on screen, tired but excited. "Just finished my last surgery for the weekend." "Almost," Sarah replied, angling the camera to show him her organized preparation. A small notebook lay open on her desk, filled with research about Harrison Properties' recent projects, board member profiles, and current market trends. "How was your day?" "Interesting, actually. Had lunch with Dr. Patel. He's quite curious about you. Seems Harrison's been making waves with his recent management decisions." Sarah sat at her small dining table, where a place setting was arranged for practice. "I've been reviewing the proper handling of formal dining utensils," she said, demonstrating the correct placement of a fish fork. "Did you know there are specific angles for resting your knife?" Michael laughed. "You're going to be the most well-prepared guest there. Speaking of which," he shifted, growing serious, "I ran into James Harrison at the hospital today." Sarah's hand stilled over the silverware. "What happened?" "He was touring the new cardiac wing with potential donors. Didn't expect to see me there, obviously. His face when Dr. Patel introduced me as Dr. Mitchell, your guest for tomorrow night. Priceless." A knock at Sarah's door interrupted their conversation. "Hold on," she told Michael, moving to answer it. Her entire evening cleaning crew stood in the hallway, led by Rosa and Manuel. They carried a small cake and what appeared to be a gift bag. "We know tomorrow's the big night," Rosa said, stepping forward. "We wanted to wish you luck." Sarah felt her throat tighten as they filed into her apartment, her two worlds colliding, the pristine place setting on her table, meeting the worn hands and tired smiles of her team. Manuel set the cake down carefully, avoiding the practiced arrangement of forks and knives. "It's not much," he said, handing her the gift bag, "but we wanted you to have something from us." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple but elegant. Sarah recognized it as the type sold by Manuel's wife at her small jewelry shop. "Michael's still on video call," Sarah said, turning her phone so her team could see her brother. They waved, called out greetings. Michael's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Taking good care of my sister?" he asked them. "Always," Rosa replied. "She takes care of us too." They didn't stay long. Most had families to return to, second jobs to get to. But before leaving, each one hugged Sarah, whispered encouragements, shared their pride. The cake they left behind was homemade, decorated with slightly wobbly letters spelling out, "Show them who you are." After they left, Sarah returned to her video call with Michael. "Did you have something to do with the bracelet?" she asked, suspecting her brother's involvement. "Maybe I mentioned to Manuel that you needed accessories," he admitted, "but the gesture was all them. You've built something special here, Sarah." She touched the bracelet gently. "Mum would have loved this." "She would have loved all of it," Michael corrected. "Get some rest. I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow." After ending the call, Sarah stood in her quiet apartment, looking at the evidence of her two lives, the elegant dress and the worker's uniform, the practice place setting and the humble cake, the textbooks and the cleaning schedules. Tomorrow, these worlds would collide at the Drake Hotel. She slipped the bracelet on, its weight familiar and grounding. Then she began her evening routine, preparing for bed with the same careful attention she gave to everything else. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and Sarah Mitchell would be ready. The Drake Hotel loomed before them, its historic facade illuminated against the darkening Chicago sky. Michael pulled his Mercedes to the valet stand, and for a moment, Sarah sat still, taking in the scene through the tinted windows. Photographers lined the entrance, their flashes creating a strobe effect as Chicago's elite made their way inside. "Ready?" Michael asked, adjusting his bow tie. Sarah checked her reflection one last time. The red dress moved like liquid fire. Her dark hair swept into an elegant updo that had taken an hour to perfect. Manuel's silver bracelet caught the light at her wrist. She looked herself, elevated perhaps, but authentically Sarah Mitchell. Ready. The valet opened her door, and Sarah emerged with the poise she'd practiced all week. Michael appeared at her side, offering his arm with natural grace. As they approached the entrance, she recognized faces from business magazines and newspaper society pages. A few photographers turned their cameras toward them, the unknown arrivals who somehow looked like they belonged. "Dr. Mitchell!" The call came from Dr. Patel, who stood near the entrance with his wife. "And this must be your sister, Sarah, isn't it? I've heard remarkable things about your work at Harrison Properties." Before Sarah could respond, more voices joined in. Hospital board members recognized Michael, introducing their spouses, drawing Sarah into conversations about property management and operational efficiency. She found herself discussing cost reduction strategies with a real estate developer who seemed genuinely interested in her innovations. They were halfway through the receiving line when she saw him. James Harrison stood near the ballroom entrance, greeting guests with practiced charm. His smile faltered slightly as they approached, his eyes widening at the sight of Sarah and Michael moving easily through his carefully curated crowd. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah said smoothly, extending her hand. "Thank you for the invitation." He recovered quickly, professional mask sliding back into place. "Ms. Mitchell, and Dr. Mitchell, what an unexpected pleasure." "James!" Dr. Patel appeared beside them. "You didn't mention Sarah was Dr. Mitchell's sister." "We were just discussing her remarkable work with building operations. Those efficiency protocols she implemented, brilliant stuff." Harrison's smile tightened. "Yes, well, Ms. Mitchell is very thorough, more than thorough," another voice chimed in. Richard Chen approaching with a champagne flute. "The board was reviewing her department's numbers just last week. Impressive work, Sarah." They moved into the ballroom, leaving Harrison at the door. The space was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements that could have funded a semester of Sarah's MBA, tables dressed in ivory and gold. At their assigned table, not number 11, she noticed, but table 3 near the center, place cards had been hastily rearranged. "Politics?" Michael whispered, noticing her observation. "Can't seat the hospital's rising star surgeon at the back, can they?" Sarah took in the room with calm appreciation, noting the subtle power plays unfolding around them. She recognized most of the faces now, having studied them all week. CEOs, investors, board members. Some nodded in recognition, others looked curious. None showed the dismissive attitude she'd prepared herself for. "Sarah Mitchell?" A woman in blue approached their table. "Linda mentioned you'd be here. I'm Helen Barnes from Westbrook Development. We should talk about your maintenance protocols sometime. Our properties could use that kind of efficiency." As dinner approached, Sarah felt the weight of eyes on her, not hostile or mocking, but interested, evaluating. She sat straighter, remembering her mother's words, "Your worth isn't in how others see you, but in how you carry yourself." The photographer Harrison had positioned nearby kept shooting, but somehow Sarah suspected the photos wouldn't tell the story he'd planned. Instead of a fish out of water, they would show a professional woman in her element, engaged in meaningful conversation with Chicago's business leaders, her brother's presence adding gravitas, but not overshadowing her own quiet confidence. The evening was young, but already the script was being rewritten. Sarah caught Harrison watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable. She raised her champagne glass slightly in his direction, a gentle acknowledgement that his game had changed players, and perhaps its outcome as well. The first course arrived with military precision, delicate plates of seared scallops arranged like modern art. Sarah remembered her etiquette training, waiting for others to begin, selecting the correct fork with practiced ease. Across the table, Michael engaged their fellow diners in light conversation, his natural charm creating a comfortable atmosphere. "Tell me, Dr. Mitchell," said Margaret Vandermeer, the notorious poodle enthusiast who was supposed to bore Sarah all evening, "how did you balance your surgical residency with supporting your sister's education? Remarkable dedication, both of you." Harrison, seated 2 tables away, kept glancing in their direction. Sarah could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his laugh seemed forced as he spoke with his immediate companions. This wasn't how he'd planned the evening to unfold. "Miss Mitchell," called Jerome Walsh, a senior partner at Goldman Sachs from the adjacent table. "James Chen mentioned you're in his MBA cohort at Northwestern. We're always looking for operations specialists who understand both theory and practical application." Sarah engaged him in a detailed discussion about process optimization, drawing on both her coursework and real-world experience. She could feel Harrison's attention sharpen, though he pretended to be absorbed in his own conversation. "The key," she explained to Walsh, "is understanding that efficiency isn't just about cutting costs, it's about maximizing human potential. When people feel valued, they invest themselves in their work." The second course arrived, a soup that required particular attention to proper spoon etiquette. Sarah handled it gracefully, her movements natural after hours of practice. Michael caught her eye, giving her a subtle nod of approval. "Dr. Mitchell," Harrison called suddenly, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "I'm curious, what made you choose Northwestern Memorial for your practice? Surely there were other opportunities." The question carried a barb, an attempt to suggest nepotism in Sarah's MBA admission, but Michael had anticipated something like this. "Actually," he replied smoothly, "I was recruited specifically for the Cardiac Innovation Program. Sarah's academic achievements at Northwestern came years later, entirely on her own merit. Though I must say, her success managing your properties while maintaining a 4.0 GPA is rather impressive." Dr. Patel, who had been listening, jumped in. "Speaking of cardiac innovation, James, have you considered the potential for implementing some of Sarah's efficiency protocols in the new medical center project? The cost savings could be substantial." The conversation shifted to business opportunities, with Sarah contributing insights that demonstrated both her practical experience and academic knowledge. Her voice remained steady, professional, neither apologetic nor confrontational. She was simply herself, competent, prepared, dignified. As the main course was served, Sarah noticed Claire, Harrison's assistant, watching her with something like admiration. The younger woman had clearly expected to witness a humiliation. Instead, she was seeing a masterclass in grace under pressure. "You know," Margaret Vandermeer said quietly, as the tables around them buzzed with conversation, "I was at last year's gala when that poor girl from accounting, Gloria was it, left in tears. This is much more entertaining." Sarah met the older woman's knowing look with a slight smile. "I'm just here to enjoy a lovely evening, Mrs. Vandermeer." "Of course you are, dear, and you're doing it beautifully." The evening proceeded like a well-rehearsed dance, with Sarah and Michael playing their parts to perfection. But it wasn't the performance Harrison had scripted. Instead of a cautionary tale about knowing one's place, it was becoming a story about redefining what that place could be. As the dessert course approached, Sarah caught snippets of whispered conversations around them. The narrative was shifting. Tomorrow, when the gossip spread through Chicago's business circles, it wouldn't be about Harrison's power play. It would be about the promising young MBA student who'd impressed Jerome Walsh, the innovative operations manager who'd caught Helen Barnes's attention, and the dignified woman who turned an attempted humiliation into a networking triumph. Harrison's game wasn't just failing, it was backfiring spectacularly. The dessert, an artfully plated chocolate souffle, arrived as conversations around the ballroom reached their crescendo. Sarah noted how the dynamics had shifted throughout the evening. What began as clearly defined social circles had evolved into fluid discussions that crossed traditional boundaries. "You mentioned efficiency protocols earlier," Helen Barnes said, leaning across the table. "Our Manhattan properties have been struggling with similar issues you faced at Harrison. Would you be open to a consultation?" Before Sarah could respond, Jerome Walsh joined in. "Actually, we should discuss this further. Goldman has several real estate investment trusts that could benefit from your expertise." From his table, Harrison watched these interactions with growing discomfort. His carefully orchestrated evening had transformed into something beyond his control. The photographer he'd hired was still circulating, but instead of capturing moments of social awkwardness, he was documenting Sarah's increasing integration into Chicago's business elite. "Tell them about the maintenance tracking system you developed," Michael prompted, knowing Sarah had designed it while studying information systems in her MBA program. Sarah described the software platform she'd created, which combined traditional maintenance schedules with predictive analytics. "It reduced our emergency repair costs by 40% in the first quarter," she explained, her passion for the work evident in her voice. 40%. Richard Chen had approached their table, dessert fork in hand. "James, are you hearing this? That's significantly better than the industry standard." Harrison's response was cut off by Dr. Patel's enthusiasm. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we need for the medical center project. Efficiency in building operations directly impacts patient care delivery." Sarah felt a subtle shift in the room's energy. She was no longer being evaluated as Harrison's humble employee, but as a professional in her own right. The very qualities Harrison had meant to expose as presumptuous, her education, her ambition, her competence, were instead marking her as someone to watch. "Ms. Mitchell," a voice called from nearby. It was Claire, Harrison's assistant, looking somewhat uncertain. Would it be possible to meet sometime to discuss your career path? I'm considering evening classes myself." "Of course," Sarah replied warmly, remembering her own early days of uncertainty. The evening's formal program began: awards, acknowledgements, the standard ceremony of corporate gatherings. But the real story was unfolding in the quiet conversations around the room. Business cards were being exchanged, connections made, opportunities discussed. Harrison rose to give his customary speech, his eyes flickering to Sarah's table more than once. His words about maintaining standards and knowing one's place seemed to fall flat, meeting polite but unenthusiastic applause. "Interesting evening," Margaret Vandermeer murmured to Sarah. "You know, dear, I sit on several non-profit boards. We could use someone with your perspective on operations management." As coffee was served, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a gilt-edged mirror. The red dress glowed under the chandeliers. Manuel's silver bracelet gleamed at her wrist, but it was her expression that caught her attention. Composed, confident, at peace with herself and her place in this room. She thought of her team back at Harrison Properties, of Rosa and Manuel and all the others who'd supported her journey. Tomorrow's victory wouldn't just be hers. It would belong to everyone who'd ever been underestimated, overlooked, or invited to the wrong table for the right reasons. The evening was winding down, but its repercussions were just beginning. Harrison's attempt to put Sarah Mitchell in her place had succeeded, just not the place he'd intended. As the orchestra began playing slower melodies, signaling the evening's gradual wind-down, Sarah excused herself to visit the powder room. In the marble-clad sanctuary, she overheard two women discussing the evening's unexpected developments. "Did you hear? Goldman's Walsh practically offered her a job at the table. And Helen Barnes, too. Harrison looks like he's swallowed something sour." Sarah adjusted her bracelet in the mirror, thinking of Manuel's wife crafting it in her small shop. The contrast between that world and this one felt less stark now, less defining. Both were part of her story. When she returned to the ballroom, she found Harrison himself standing near her table, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Michael and Dr. Patel. "The board is quite interested in her cost reduction strategies," Dr. Patel was saying, "particularly given the scale of the medical center project." Harrison's reply was cut short by Helen Barnes approaching Sarah with purpose. "I'm leaving shortly, but I wanted to make this official." She handed Sarah her business card with a cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Call my office Monday. We should discuss opportunities at Westbrook." More business cards appeared, from Walsh, from two real estate developers, from a venture capital firm interested in her maintenance tracking system. Sarah accepted each one gracefully, noting the subtle shift in Harrison's expression as he watched the exchanges. "Ms. Mitchell," he said finally, his voice carefully modulated. "A word." They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom. Sarah noticed several people watching with poorly concealed interest, including Claire, who had abandoned any pretense of not listening. "It seems I may have—" Harrison paused, searching for words that wouldn't compromise his position. "Underestimated certain aspects of your contribution to Harrison Properties." "That's very possible, Mr. Harrison," Sarah replied evenly, "though I believe my work has always spoken for itself." "Indeed." He glanced around the room, noting the various power players who had taken interest in his supposedly humble employee. "The board has been discussing expansion plans for our operations division." Sarah recognized the offer hidden in his statement. A promotion, perhaps, or at least a title that would better reflect her responsibilities. But the time for such gestures had passed. "That sounds like an excellent opportunity," she said diplomatically. "I'm sure you'll find someone highly qualified to lead it." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've received other offers this evening." "Several, all quite interesting." The music shifted, and Michael appeared at her side. "Sorry to interrupt, but I believe this is our dance, sis. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Harrison." As they moved to the dance floor, Sarah caught glimpses of various reactions around the room. Claire was typing frantically on her phone, probably updating the office gossip chain. Richard Chen was watching with poorly concealed satisfaction. Dr. Patel was deep in conversation with Jerome Walsh, both occasionally glancing her way. "You know," Michael said as they danced, "I don't think this evening went quite as planned." Sarah smiled, thinking of the notebook where she'd practiced her responses, the hours spent preparing for confrontations that never came. No, it went much better. The photographer Harrison had hired was still circulating, but now he was capturing something very different from what had been intended. Sarah Mitchell, elegant in red, dancing with her surgeon brother, surrounded by Chicago's elite who had accepted her as one of their own. The evening's power play had transformed into something else entirely, not a cautionary tale about staying in one's place, but a story about creating one's own place through competence, dignity, and quiet strength. The final hour of the gala took on a dreamlike quality as the orchestra played softer melodies. Couples swayed on the dance floor, while others gathered in small groups, exchanging final business cards and promises to connect. Sarah stood near one of the ornate pillars, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. "Quite an evening," Richard Chen approached, champagne flute in hand. "You know, I was the one who first noticed your department's numbers. Remarkable improvements, quarter after quarter." Harrison tried to credit it to new equipment investments. Sarah smiled diplomatically. "Good equipment helps, but it's the people who make the real difference." "Exactly." Richard glanced toward Harrison, who was now speaking with board members in hushed tones. "Some of us understand that. Others, well, they're learning tonight." More goodbyes followed. Helen Barnes insisted again that Sarah call first thing Monday. Jerome Walsh mentioned Goldman's impressive benefits package, emphasizing their tuition reimbursement program. Even Margaret Vandermeer surprised her with a warm embrace and a whispered, "Well played, my dear." Near the exit, Claire hovered uncertainly before stepping forward. "Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about the seating chart thing. You know, when we tried to put you at table 11. "Don't worry about it," Sarah replied genuinely. "Sometimes things work out exactly as they should." Michael rejoined her after saying goodbye to his hospital colleagues. "Ready to go?" As they waited for the valet, Dr. Patel approached with his wife. "Sarah, one last thing. The board meets Tuesday to discuss the medical center project. We'd love to have you present your ideas about operational efficiency, assuming you're still available, of course." The subtle emphasis on available wasn't lost on Sarah. Word of the evening's job offers had clearly circulated. "I'll have my office send the details," he continued, then added with a smile, "The old guard isn't always right about who belongs where." The Mercedes arrived, and Michael held the door for her. As Sarah settled into the leather seat, she caught a final glimpse of the Drake Hotel's gleaming facade. Harrison stood at the entrance, watching their departure. She raised her hand in a small wave, not triumphant, not mocking, just a simple acknowledgement between professionals. As they pulled away, Michael grinned. "So, should we start negotiating my finder's fee for all these job offers?" "Very funny." Sarah leaned back, finally allowing herself to fully relax. "You know, I prepared for everything. Criticism, snubs, awkward moments. I never prepared for actual success. That's because you already knew how to handle success. It's who you are, sis." They drove through Chicago's glittering downtown, past Harrison Properties where Sarah's day had started, just as it had for the past 5 years. Tomorrow would bring decisions, opportunities, changes. But tonight had brought something more valuable, confirmation that her worth wasn't determined by others' expectations, but by her own quiet confidence and unwavering dignity. The red dress shimmered in the passing streetlights, Manuel's bracelet caught the glow of the dashboard, and Sarah Mitchell smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Sarah arrived at Harrison Properties at her usual time, 4:45 a.m. The pre-dawn air carried the same crisp breeze, the marble lobby reflected the same security lights, but something had fundamentally shifted. Manuel was already at his post, trying and failing to suppress a grin. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. Or should I say, future CEO. "It's still just Sarah," she replied, accepting the day's inventory list. "And I'm still me." But news of Saturday night had already spread through the building's invisible network. As her team gathered for the morning briefing, she could feel their barely contained excitement. Rosa clutched her phone, which displayed a society page photo from the gala. Sarah, in the red dress, engaged in conversation with Helen Barnes and Jerome Walsh. "The whole building's talking about it," Rosa said proudly. "They say Mr. Harrison looked like he'd seen a ghost when Dr. Patel started discussing your ideas." Sarah maintained her professional demeanor as she distributed assignments, but she allowed herself to share in their quiet joy. These people weren't just her staff, they were the foundation of everything she'd achieved. "Before we start," she announced, "I want you all to know something. Whatever opportunities come my way, they're built on the work we've done together. Your dedication, your trust, your support, that's what made Saturday night possible." Manuel stepped forward, speaking for the group. "You showed them what we already knew, Jefa. That's all." The morning proceeded with its usual efficiency, but with subtle differences. Mid-level managers who'd previously barely nodded now stopped to chat. Claire, Harrison's assistant, brought Sarah coffee, not as a servant's gesture, but as one professional to another. At 9 a.m., Sarah's phone began buzzing with scheduled calls. Helen Barnes's office wanted to set up a formal interview. Goldman Sachs's HR department needed her resume. Dr. Patel's secretary confirmed Tuesday's board presentation. Harrison himself didn't appear until noon. He stood in his office doorway as Sarah completed her midday inspection of the executive floor. "Ms. Mitchell," he called out, his tone carefully neutral. "A moment." She entered his office, noting how the power dynamic had shifted since their last interaction here. Harrison gestured to a visitor's chair, not the one by the door, but the one reserved for valued colleagues. "I understand you've received several interesting offers." "Yes, sir." Harrison Properties is prepared to make a counteroffer. Executive Director of Operations, reporting directly to the board. Full benefits, substantial salary increase, accelerated MBA completion program. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "That's very generous." "It's overdue," he admitted, surprising them both. "The board has been quite vocal about retaining key talent." She thought about the team downstairs, about Manuel and Rosa, about the invisible network of people who kept this building running. "I'll consider it, Mr. Harrison, but any decision I make will prioritize maintaining the standards and systems we've built here." He nodded, understanding the subtle emphasis on we. Leaving his office, Sarah walked to the window wall, looking out over the city she'd spent years caring for, first as a cleaner, then as a supervisor, now as something more. Her phone buzzed again. Michael checking in. "How's the morning after?" he texted. She thought about Harrison's offer, about Helen Barnes's enthusiasm, about Goldman's prestige, but mostly she thought about the small moments. Manuel's pride, Rosa's joy, Claire's coffee, her team's unwavering support. "Still processing," she replied, "but I know what Mum would say." "Your worth isn't in the title they give you," Michael texted back, "but in how you earn it." Sarah smiled, tucking her phone away. She had inspections to complete, a team to supervise and decisions to make, but for now she simply appreciated the view from where she stood, a view she'd earned through dedication, dignity, and the quiet power of being underestimated. The morning shift wasn't over, but Sarah Mitchell's new day was just beginning. The operations division at Harrison Properties occupied the entire 38th floor now, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. Sarah Mitchell, still known as Just Sarah to her original team, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet. "Ms. Mitchell," Claire, now her assistant, appeared at the door. "Your brother's here for lunch, and the board meeting materials are ready for review." Sarah nodded, setting down her tablet. The office still felt new, though she'd been executive director of operations for 5 months. She'd accepted Harrison's offer, but on her own terms, including maintaining direct oversight of her original cleaning staff and implementing her management systems company-wide. "Also," Claire added with a small smile, "Manuel wanted you to know the new training program starts today." The Mitchell Method, as the board had dubbed it, was being rolled out across all Harrison Properties. More importantly, it included a career development track for maintenance and custodial staff, complete with education assistance and promotion pathways. Michael waited in the lobby, still in surgical scrubs. "Ready for our standing lunch date, sis?" They headed to the Cornerstone Diner, which had become something of a tradition. As they settled into their usual booth, Doris brought their coffee without asking. "How's the new cardiac wing?" Sarah asked. "Coming along. Harrison Properties' efficiency protocols are apparently the talk of the hospital board." Michael grinned. "Speaking of which, how's the MBA? Final semester." Sarah stirred her coffee. "They want me to give the student commencement speech." Mom would have loved that. She would have loved all of it. Through the diner window, they could see Harrison Properties rising against the autumn sky. Sarah thought about the changes of the past 6 months, Harrison's gradual acceptance of her leadership, her team's growing confidence, the subtle shift in how the entire company viewed its support staff. "You know what's funny?" she said, picking up her sandwich. "Harrison actually thanked me yesterday. Apparently, our employee retention numbers are the highest in the industry." "Amazing what happens when people feel valued," Michael replied. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Rosa showing photos of the new training class. 20 faces smiled at the camera, each wearing a Harrison Properties uniform and a look of possibility. "Extra pickles?" Michael asked, pushing his plate toward her. "Always," Sarah smiled, thinking of Sunday lunches long ago, of lessons learned and battles won, of dignity maintained and respect earned. Outside, Chicago continued its eternal motion. Executives in town cars, middle management hurrying through crosswalks, service workers keeping the city's heart beating. But inside Harrison Properties, the old boundaries were shifting, one small victory at a time. Sarah Mitchell had found her place, not the one others had chosen for her, but the one she'd created for herself. And she'd held the door open behind her, ensuring others could follow. It turned out that the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was building something better than anyone had imagined possible, even if it started with simply showing up at 4:45 a.m., ready to prove that every job had dignity, every person had value, and every day held the possibility of change.